Good evening, everybody. So my name is Rose Jansen, and I'm with the Academy of Science St. Louis, and we are very pleased to be partnering with the St. Louis Zoo to bring you tonight's Science Seminar Series talk, The Science of Happiness, with Washington University lecturer in psychology and assistant dean, Dr. Timothy Bono. For those of you who aren't familiar with the Academy, I'm going to take just a moment to tell you a little bit about who we are. We are an independent science organization supported entirely through community contributions. At venues throughout the region, we connect science and the community through free and or very low-cost public talks, science seminars and workshops, and trips and tours that feature scientists and engineering professionals of both national and international renown. In addition to advancing the public understanding of science, it's our mission to inspire the next generation of scientists and science advocates, so we offer a number of free and low-cost opportunities expressly for teens, such as our Teen Science Cafes, Teen Cafe Youth Leadership Council, and Junior Academy of Science. The Junior Academy is a pre-professional STEM membership organization for students in grades 6 through 12 that offers hands-on opportunities in science, engineering, and medicine. Teens can attend unique behind-the-scenes explorations of leading engineering, technology, and science labs in our region, access university libraries, participate in field opportunities, and challenging and engaging science competitions for a full range of academic levels. And Junior Academy members make real-world connections, meeting top STEM professionals. You can find more information on the Junior Academy and all of our community-wide science events and programs by visiting our website at academyofsciencestl.org, or you may also visit us on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter, or before you leave tonight, pick up some of the literature that is on the table just outside the auditorium. I do want to mention a couple upcoming Academy events you might have an interest in attending. Next Tuesday evening at the Missouri History Museum, as part of our Perspectives on Science and History series, you'll want to join us for the Science of Coffee, a coffee tasting and lecture featuring Caldi's owner, Tyler Zimmer, and executive chef, Frank McGinty. This event takes place in the museum's lower-level atrium and Lee Auditorium from 6:30 to 8:30 p.m., and it is free and open to the public, and you do not need to register to attend. And then on Wednesday, December 9, from 6 to 8 p.m. at the Center of Clayton, and as part of our On Science series in partnership with Oasis St. Louis, University of Missouri St. Louis Founders Professor of Criminology and Criminal Justice, Richard Rosenfeld, talks about what science and statistics tells us about Ferguson and police use of deadly force. This event is open to all. There is a modest $10 fee to attend, and you do need to register, and you can do so by calling 314-533-8586, or by logging onto the Academy website, again at academyofsciencestl.org. And then lastly, you'll want to mark your calendars for the next two science seminars in our series here at the St. Louis Zoo for Tuesday evening, February 2, when Academy Fellow and Physics Professor Dr. Martin Israel, in a quest to understand the fundamental nature of our universe, talks about the search for cosmic rays and high-energy neutrinos in stratospheric balloons over Antarctica, astrophysics with instruments 125,000 feet above the ground. And then on Tuesday evening, March 1, Academy Outstanding St. Louis Scientist Innovation Award recipient Dr. Gautam Dantas talks about new DNA sequencing and computational technologies being used to combat the evolution of antibiotic-resistant superbugs. Both talks take place at 7:30 p.m. and are free and open to the public. Middle and high school students are encouraged to attend. Registration is not required. And again, you can find more information on our website or listed on the event flyers that are available for you to take with you before you leave tonight. If you'd like to receive e-notification of upcoming Academy public lectures and events, we will have some e-news sign-up sheets that will make their way around the audience. If you are a student and you need to verify your attendance in tonight's talk, we will have verification cards available following the Q&A out at the table outside the auditorium. Please turn off cell phone ringers or any other electronic devices that might make noise during tonight's program. And with all that said, I'm going to introduce tonight's speaker, Dr. Timothy Bono. Dr. Bono earned his BA, MA, and Ph.D. in psychology from Washington University in St. Louis, where he graduated cum laude and where he is currently Assistant Dean for Assessment and Analytics in the College of Arts and Sciences and lecturer in psychology with the Department of Psychological and Brain Sciences. His research interests include personality, positive psychology, and student development, and his research and ideas on the science of happiness have been featured in a number of media outlets, including Fast Company, St. Louis Public Radio, and CNN. He is the recipient of the Dean's Award for Teaching Excellence at Washington University and the Outstanding Research Award from the Association for Orientation, Transition, and Retention in Higher Education, and he is here with us tonight to talk about positive psychology and the science of happiness. So on behalf of the Academy of Science St. Louis and the St. Louis Zoo, won't you please join me in welcoming Dr. Timothy Bono.
Thank you very much, Rose, for that nice introduction. Thanks also for the invitation to be here this evening. As Rose mentioned to you, my academic background is in psychology, which means that by definition, I am a psychologist. And when most people hear that, or when they think about the nature of the work that a psychologist does for a living, most people think of what I would consider to be the traditional view of psychology. Oh, this started at the end. We're going to go back. Just 1 second. You're seeing my... Okay, there we go. All right, so most people think of the traditional view of psychology. They think of an individual who focuses on providing interventions for people's problems. Problems like depression, schizophrenia, or anxiety. The reason why most people associate the field of psychology with the study of mental disorders is because historically, that's where the field of psychology has placed most of its attention. So to illustrate this for you, I recently did a search for the number of articles that have been produced on various topics in our field, and I'd like to share with you the findings. So on the y-axis here, you'll notice the number of articles, and the x-axis will have various topics in psychology. So for example, over the last century that psychology has been a field, the topic of depression has been featured in more than 140,000 scientific articles looking into its nature and interventions to treat depression. Schizophrenia has been the topic of more than 80,000 articles. Anxiety, more than 125,000 articles. And these are really important topics in our field. They deserve this kind of attention. But just for the sake of comparison, let's take a look at the numbers as they relate to other topics in our field, like those that I study, happiness, which over the last century has been the topic of a whopping 7,967 articles. Joy, 4,921. Life satisfaction, 7,428. So as you can see here, over the last century, we've placed a lot more attention on the negative side of humanity relative to the amount of attention that we've placed on the more positive end of that continuum. But in recent years, there has been a shift in the way that psychology has thought about itself as a field. And this shift is in many ways analogous to something that other fields and other professions have seen for themselves. For example, in medicine, 25 years ago, if you would have asked a doctor, what do I need to be healthy? Most doctors 25 years ago would have told you, well, if you're not sick and you don't have a disease, then you're healthy. Ask a doctor that same question today, and she's much more likely to tell you, if you want to be healthy, you've got to have a good immune system, flexible joints, good aerobic capabilities. In other words, physical health is no longer considered simply the absence of disease, but it's something over and above that. Well, psychology has seen a similar shift for itself in terms of what it means to be psychologically healthy. And in recent years, many psychologists have come to the conclusion that focusing on mental disorders and other negative emotional states, that remains a very important part of the work that we do and of what psychology is about. But we've decided that the study of mental disorders is really only one half of our task. Because by focusing exclusively on the question of what's wrong with people and how do we fix that, we've been missing the question of what's right with people and how do we build on that. And so over the last decade or two, the field of psychology has begun to broaden its emphasis to give attention to that question of what's right with people. So that nowadays we are focusing not only on the negative, but also on the positive. This picture makes some people happy. So as a result, we've seen the emergence of this subfield within psychology called positive psychology, which has really as its most fundamental premise that psychology is not just about correcting errors, but it's also about building meaningful lives based on our strengths, identifying those things that are working for us, and then incorporating behaviors into our lives that can make us happier. So for my presentation this evening, I've pulled some of my favorite studies, some of my favorite theoretical frameworks, and I'll present to you 5 habits for happiness, all of which are based on research in the hopes that you'll be able to take this and think about behaviors that you might incorporate into your own life to increase your happiness. Now, before I delve right into the research, though, I do want to acknowledge that not everyone is a proponent of positive psychology and of the pursuit of happiness. As positive psychology has been getting has been getting more attention, we've gotten some pushback and some critics. Some people say positive psychology is actually a negative thing. So a couple of years ago, there was an article in the Wall Street Journal that posed the question, is happiness overrated? And shortly after this article came out, USA Today had a response, final word, happiness is overrated, you can bank on it. There have also been some books on the topic. Recently, there was a book that came out by Jeanette Winterson called Why Be Happy When You Could Be Normal? Obviously, you can't be both happy and normal. Of course, the claims that she makes in her book are not nearly as strong as those made by Barbara Ehrenreich, who a couple of years ago came out with her book called Bright-Sided, How the Relentless Promotion of Positive Thinking Has Undermined America. So now, not only is happiness overrated, not only is it abnormal to be happy, now happiness is harmful to society. Well, I've taken it upon myself to take a look at these articles and to read these books, and as far as I can tell, they do a really nice job of illustrating many of the most common misconceptions that people have about the nature of positive psychology. There's a lot of stuff out there that makes these very lofty claims about the nature of human happiness and how to pursue it under the guise of positive psychology, when in fact those ideas often lack any sort of empirical support. So I feel compelled, before I delve into the research, to debunk some of the most common myths that exist about positive psychology as a science and as an academic discipline. So the first basic premise is, once and for all, that positive psychology is not about being happy all the time. There are a lot of self-help books out there that will say, if you follow these 3 steps or do this one quick thing, then it will eliminate all negativity from your life and you'll be happy all the time. There's no scientific support whatsoever to suggest that's even possible. We generally think about our emotional experiences residing on a continuum. So if you imagine that there's a horizontal plane going across the stage that represents this range of human experiences, on one end of that continuum, you'd have really negative emotional experiences, things like sadness or anger or fear or anxiety. Toward the middle, you'd have essentially no emotion whatsoever. You'd have at rest or calm or placid, kind of the absence of positivity or negativity. And then closer to the other end of the continuum, you'd have the really good stuff, positive emotions like happiness and joy. One of the things we know is that it is simply part of the human experience for us all to have the capacity to experience that full range of human emotion, which means that all of us have the capacity to experience really positive emotions like happiness and joy, and all of us also have the capacity for the more negative emotions, things like anxiety, fear, or loneliness. Although I guess that second point isn't entirely true. So we have researched this extensively, we've searched the world over, and it turns out that there are in fact 2 kinds of people in the world who never experience any of those negative emotions over on that other end of the continuum. They never have bad days, they never get sad or lonely or frustrated. Those 2 kinds of people are sociopaths and the dead. But everybody else, this is to say that all psychologically healthy people experience the full range of human emotion. So the implication here is that the next time you wake up and you're just having a really terrible day and you're feeling angry and upset and you're ruminating over previous mistakes you've made in your life, it means 2 things. Number 1, you're not a sociopath. Number 2, you're still alive. Congratulations. And to clarify, I do not mean to make light of those negative emotional experiences, because we know that those negative emotions affect people in very real ways. However, if we put all of our attention on correcting errors, as important as that research is, if that's where all of our time and attention go, the best we can ever hope for is to be at the 0 point, to be at neutral. Because the other thing we know to be true about human emotions is that happiness does not spontaneously arise when we take away unhappiness. Happiness is not the opposite of unhappiness. In order for us to move to that more positive end of the continuum, we have to adopt a different set of strategies. And that's what positive psychology as a science is all about, trying to understand what the behaviors and the mindsets are that we can incorporate into our lives that will lead to real and sustainable gains in our overall psychological health and happiness. So the first basic premise is positive psychology is not about being happy all the time. The second basic premise, and this is the one, I'm glad you're sitting down for this, because this is generally the shocker. So not only is positive psychology not about being happy all the time, turns out it's not even about becoming happy. There's nothing about the research or the classes or the presentations we give that have as a goal to make people happy. What this field is about, what the classes are about, what the research is about, instead is about becoming happier. It's not about being happy, it's about being happier. And many people look at this and they say, well, wait a second, what's the difference? Why are you drawing a distinction between those two phrases? Aren't those really the same thing? In my view, there is a world of difference between those two phrases. Because for us to go about our lives asking the question, how can I be happy? What do I need to do to be happy? What kind of job do I need to get to be happy? What city should I live in to be happy? How much money do I need to make to be happy? What kind of relationship partner should I have to be happy? That's treating happiness as if it is a binary, a 1 or a 0, a yes or a no. Either I'm happy or I'm unhappy. It's as if there is some point over there called happiness. And as soon as I get the right job and the right promotion and the right salary and live in the right neighborhood, then I will be happy. Then I will have reached that point called happiness. Whereas right before I had those things, I was unhappy and life was bad. It turns out that a much more useful approach in the pursuit of happiness is to acknowledge that happiness itself resides on a continuum. And so a much more useful way to approach this topic, instead of saying, how can I be happy, is to say, given the circumstances of my life, given some things that are beyond my control, what are the things that are within my control that I can be changing about my life or changing about my approach to life so that a year from now or 5 years from now or 10 years from now, I can be happier than I am today. And that shift in perspective by itself can be very useful for putting us on the right path toward happiness. So that first of the 5 habits for happiness, I would say, is simply thinking about how we're asking the question. Instead of focusing on being happy, much more useful for us to think about how we can become happier. So how do we become happier? Well, one of the things that we know to figure prominently in our happiness has to do with our mindset. And I would argue that mindset itself is a much stronger contributor to our happiness than the external circumstances of our lives. And I'd like to illustrate this with you, or I'd like to illustrate this for you with one of my favorite studies in the field. This is a study that was done by Deborah Danner and colleagues back in 2001. It's often called the Nun Study because it was a team of researchers who took an interest in a cohort of nuns. And it wasn't this exact group of nuns, but this is the first picture that comes up when you type group of nuns into Google Images. So there was a cohort of nuns that they took an interest in, and the reason why they were so interested in these women is because as part of their entry into the convent, each of these nuns had to provide a written statement talking about themselves, their lives, and their hopes for the future. Now, at the time that these women entered the convent, this was probably about 80 years or so before the study itself actually took place. But this convent had kept on file all of these written statements where these women were talking about themselves when they were young adults. Most of them were in their early 20s at the time that they had entered the convent, and in fact, most of them had already passed away at the time that the study had taken place. But these researchers were able to get a hold of all of these written statements, and they read each one, and they counted the total number of positive words that the women used to talk about themselves, and based on these written statements, they were able to glean some index of how happy these women were with their lives in their early 20s. And it was a relatively simple study because they were really just looking at two variables. The first variable was how happy were they as a young adult. The second variable was how long did the women live? And they wanted to see if there might be a relationship between happiness at a relatively young age and the length of one's life. So after they read each of these written statements and they put them into 4 categories ranging from the least happy to the most happy, and sure enough, a very interesting pattern emerged when comparing the least happy with the most happy of these women. So among the least happy quartile, 34% of them lived to age 85, and 11% lived to age 94. Now, by most standards, that's not too shabby. But let's compare the data on the least happy of the nuns with the most happy of the nuns, because among these women, 90% of them lived to age 85, 54%, just over half, made it to age 94. Now, the key thing to keep in mind about this study is that if we had done this with a bunch of random people, if we had gone over to the University City Loop and just taken a random group of people and measured their happiness when they were at a relatively young age and found evidence to show that the happiest people when they were young were those who had the longest lives overall, we might be able to make the case that, well, it's the people who are, when they're happy or when they're young, they're going to go out and have more exciting, more adventurous lifestyles, and that's what's going to contribute to the length of their lives. Well, maybe, but we have to keep in mind that this was a study done with a bunch of nuns. Now, it's not to say that nuns don't have exciting or adventurous lives. It is to say that nuns have lives that are very similar to one another. That's the key strength of this study. All of these women are living in the same place. Their daily routines are largely the same. The amount of money that they have at their disposal, largely the same. Their religious and political ideology, pretty much the same. Their habits are the same. Some of you got that. All right. So essentially, all of the external circumstances of their lives are essentially controlled for. This is a group that they are their own control group. There's not a lot of variability from one nun to another. Therefore, any differences that we observe in an outcome like longevity must be due at least in part to their mindset and to the way that they are interpreting things on a daily basis. And many studies have looked at this from various angles and all reached the same conclusion, that the circumstances of our lives, the exact profession we have, how much money we have, our political or religious ideology, that does not matter nearly as much as the mindset that we take to the circumstances that we might find ourselves in. And I'd like to illustrate this for you in another way. So our second habit is to adopt a positive mindset, and we see data from that from this nun study. My illustration, I'm going to show you in a moment here a picture of a child's toy, and there's going to be a bunch of geometric shapes. What I'd like for you to do is to count silently to yourself the total number of geometric shapes that you see on the screen. You'll have 30 seconds, I'll keep track of time, and I want you to remember your instructions, which are to count the total number of shapes that you see on the screen. Ready? Go. About 5 seconds. Okay, would anyone care to shout out how many shapes they saw? Over here, please. 104, that's impressive. How about somebody from over here? Please. 17? 106, oh, yeah, you one-upped him, two-upped him, good for you. 63? You were the first guy. We're going to move over here. 75? 7? 30? Okay, so it sounds like the range is somewhere between 100 and, I'm going to go with your first answer, 104, or although 106 to 7, somewhere in between there. Okay, but quite a range, given that we were all looking at the same thing. Well, I've got some new questions for you. Who can tell me what time was on the clock? Oh, it's much harder. So I'm hearing 4 o'clock, 7 o'clock, and this. You're sort of doing that. That's good. Who can tell me how many kids were on the bus? 3, 6, 4, and some of you are saying there was a bus? What? Who can tell me what was the color of the shape farthest to the left? Green, orange, yellow. Okay, all right, sorry. I won't prolong this any longer. All right, so the purpose of this activity was not to test your counting ability. The purpose of this activity was to illustrate that when we approach a given situation, we see the things that we're looking for, and we miss the stuff that we're not looking for, even though it is there. If I were to show you that image again, you would have no difficulty answering questions about what time is on the clock, or how many kids are on the bus, or providing information about the shapes and their color and size and location. It's not because I'd be showing you anything different. The objective information would be exactly the same. But our ability to answer those questions doesn't depend on the objective circumstances. It doesn't depend on what's right in front of us as much as it depends on our mindset and the set of questions that we ourselves bring to that information. And the same thing is true more generally, that our experience of the world is heavily influenced by where we choose to focus our attention. There's this great quote by Henry Matisse who says, "There are always flowers for those who want to see them." Said differently, we could have 100 good things going on in our lives right now, but if we are not actively and effortfully looking for those 100 good things, then those good things become like the kids on the bus or the time on the clock. They might be right there in front of us, but if we're not choosing to give them attention, it's as if they're not even there, and we do not derive the positive benefits that are associated with them. Now, this notion of the focus of our attention and the implications it has for our lives has been the topic of many studies in positive psychology. So I'd like to share with you another of my favorite studies. This one was done by Emmons and McCullough back in 2003, and they recruited a large group of adults, and they asked them to keep 10 weekly journals. And these adults were instructed at the end of each of these 10 weeks to list 5 events that occurred over the course of the last week. And they were randomly assigned to one of 3 conditions. So 1/3 of the participants were told to list 5 things that they were grateful for, 5 events that had occurred over the last week that happened that made them happy, or 5 good things that they were glad that they had occurred. There was another group that was assigned to what we'll call the hassles condition. So they were asked to think back to all the stuff that happened over the last week and think back to 5 things that really bothered them or that got under their skin. And then there was a control condition, and these were people who were given no additional instructions, but simply told, list 5 random events, and often they were pretty neutral or ambiguous things. Things like I got my oil changed, or I learned that Utah is the beehive state, or some other random thing. Well, in addition to making these ratings each week of 5 good things, 5 negative things, or 5 neutral things, they were also asked to give ratings about how they felt about their life as a whole. They were asked to give ratings about how they felt about the upcoming week, if they were optimistic or pessimistic about what might happen. And they also provided an index of how often they had gotten sick over the preceding week, if they had developed a fever or a cold or a cough or any other physical ailment. Well, when they were looking at the pattern of data along these 3 dimensions and comparing the people in each of those 3 experimental groups that I described, a very interesting pattern emerged when comparing the participants in those 3 groups. Let's take a look first at how people gave, in terms of the ratings people gave to their life as a whole. So you see the 3 experimental groups, those writing about negative things, neutral things, or positive things. It turns out that over the course of those 10 weeks, the people who had been taking a few minutes to focus their attentions on things that they were grateful for felt significantly better about their life as a whole. In terms of the upcoming week, they found a very similar pattern. Those in the gratitude condition were significantly more optimistic about what might happen in the upcoming week. In terms of how often people got sick, here we find the reverse pattern. People in the gratitude condition were significantly less likely to get sick over the course of the study. And this is consistent with what we know to be true about the mind-body connection, that our psychological well-being has implications for our physical well-being as well. So we can see that across these domains, people in the gratitude condition were coming out ahead in terms of how they felt about their life as a whole, how they felt about the upcoming week, and their physical well-being. The key thing to keep in mind about this study is that the instructions were not, okay, you folks over here in this condition, in the gratitude condition, we want you to go out and have more positive experiences this week. And you folks in the hassles condition, we want you to go out and have more negative experiences this week. The instructions were very simply to put your attention on positive things or put your attention on negative things, and to think back of all the stuff that has already happened in the preceding week. Give your attention either to positive things or to negative things. The fact of the matter is that this is a relatively simple study that any one of us could do right now. We could very easily call to mind 5 good things that happened over the course of the last 7 days. Or we could easily call to mind 5 negative things that bothered us over the course of the last week. What this study and others like it have shown us is that our happiness is not simply a mathematical formula where if the number of good things that happen to us is larger than the number of bad things, then we've had a good week, and then we can be happy. And if the reverse is true, if there are more bad things than if there are more bad things than good things, then we'll be unhappy, then we'll have a bad day. The reality is that good and bad things are happening all the time. A much stronger predictor of our happiness, instead of the number of good things or the number of bad things that happen, is of the stuff that happens to us, where do we choose to place our attention? On the way home from work, when we're standing in line at the grocery store, where do our thoughts go? Are we replaying those events from our day that bothered us, the interaction we had with a coworker that gave us an uneasy feeling? Or instead, are we choosing to put our attention on positive things that maybe we have to look forward to this weekend, or maybe we got to have lunch with a friend we hadn't seen in a while? Are we choosing to focus on those things that we're grateful for? Because again, it's not about the number of good things or the number of bad things, but rather it's simply of the stuff that happens, where do we choose to give our attention? So the third habit for happiness is practicing gratitude. Many, many studies have shown these very same effects, and I would argue that this is probably one of the easiest yet most robust ways for us to increase our overall psychological health and well-being. Because the reality is that it doesn't take very much time, doesn't really take any money, and you don't even have to change anything about your life as it is. It's simply a matter of intentionally placing attention on those positive things in our lives as they come up. So the first 3 things have a lot to do with our mindset. Instead of focusing on being happy, trying to think about ways we can be happier, adopting a positive mindset, interpreting things in a more positive way, practicing gratitude. There are many people who hear about this research and they say, okay, well, this all makes sense, but I'll bet I can guess number 4. I know what would really make me happy, and that's if I had more money. Surely, if we all had more money, we'd be happier, right? We'd be just like this guy. Look how happy he is. I mean, the money falling down from the sky. This is a happy guy. Does money buy happiness? This is a question that a lot of people ask, and it's something that psychologists have become very interested in, because the conventional wisdom tells us, yeah, when you're young, make sure that you're positioning yourself for a career where you're going to have a high-paying salary, because that's your ticket to happiness. Well, the only way for us really to test this relationship empirically, to understand whether an increase in money causes an increase in happiness, would be for us to take a bunch of people from off the street, give each of them $1 million, and then track their happiness over time to see if that increase in money caused an increase in happiness. The problem is that that is a really expensive study to do. Most scientists I know would not be able to fund that kind of research. Although I see a few of you out there like, well, I'll participate. Well, we'll keep you in mind if ever the funding does come through. Although I hate to disappoint you, because it turns out we don't even need to actually do that study, because that study already happens every day. It's called the state lottery, where essentially what I just described happens. Common, ordinary, everyday people from off the street purchase a lottery ticket and then suddenly, overnight, end up with a whole bunch of money that they didn't have the day before. Psychologists have taken an interest in lottery winners because if money buys happiness, then we should expect to observe a huge increase in the happiness levels of lottery winners like this guy who just won $314.9 million. It's a lot of cowboy hats that guy can buy with that kind of money. So there have been a number of studies looking at this, tracking the happiness levels of lottery winners, and I'll plot for you the findings here. So on this graph, you'll notice along the y-axis is happiness level, so a higher value corresponds to more happiness, and then here on the x-axis is time. So it's the moment at which they purchase the lottery ticket and then the days and weeks and months that follow. Here's what happens to the happiness levels of lottery winners. So as you can see, there is initially a huge boost in the happiness levels of lottery winners. But within less than 1 year, their happiness levels return to almost exactly the same point as where they were a year earlier. So this is the 1 year mark way out here. Now, many people look at this and they say, well, wait a second, how can that be? These people still have a whole bunch of money a year later that they didn't have a year before. It's not the case that they're blowing all their money, although that happens in some cases, but on average, people are able to hang on to it. So if they still have a whole lot more money a year later than they had before, why does the happiness level go back down? Why doesn't it get high and then remain really high? Well, one of the ways that psychologists think about happiness is in terms of this formula right here, which very simply states that we can think about happiness as the quotient of what we have as compared to what we want. And one of the things that we've learned from this research is that as our money and our wealth increase, so too do our expectations about what we should have and what we want. Because we human beings are adaptable. It turns out that we can get used to most circumstances, most life events relatively easily. Which means that even if we end up acquiring all sorts of wealth so that the numerator of this formula gets really large, it turns out that it doesn't take long for the denominator to catch up. So that when we go back to this graph here, the thrill of winning the lottery wears off because all of the wealth and the glamour that are associated with that win simply get absorbed into this new baseline and this new set of expectations about how wonderful life should now be. So the age-old question, does money buy happiness? Well, money can get us more stuff, money can get us a more comfortable way of living, but it turns out that humans are so adaptable that it won't be very long before the expectations we have about how comfortable and how wonderful life should be will catch up to that, so that we achieve a new equilibrium. Now, there are two exceptions to that. It turns out that money can buy happiness in two cases. The first is for people who are extremely poor, people living in poverty. It turns out that it's really hard to be happy if you don't know where your next meal is coming from or if you don't have a roof over your head. And for people who are very poor, if they receive money that enables them to have a higher standard of living so that they do know where their next meal is coming from, that they do have basic security for survival, that will lead to an increase in happiness. But once we have our basic needs met, there's essentially a plateau in the relationship between money and happiness. The other exception is that money can buy happiness if it is spent on somebody else. And I'd like to illustrate that for you with another of my favorite studies from positive psych. This one was led by a scientist named Elizabeth Dunn and her colleagues. Dr. Dunn is a faculty member at the University of British Columbia. And together with her colleagues, one Vancouver morning, they went around campus and they recruited college students to participate in this study. And the first thing they did in the morning, they assessed the participants' happiness so that they had some baseline data on the happiness levels of those in the study. And then everybody in the study was given an envelope. and this envelope had money inside, usually the equivalent of about $5 or so. Everybody was told to take this money and spend it however they wanted, but the participants were randomly assigned to one of two conditions. For one half of the participants, they were assigned to what we'll call the personal spending condition. They're told you can buy whatever you want, but make sure that you're buying it for yourself. So you can pay a bill with this, you can buy supplies if you need it, whatever you want, but it's got to be something for yourself. The other half of the participants were assigned to what we'll call the pro-social spending condition. So these are folks who were told to take their money and spend it on somebody else. Again, they're told you can buy whatever you want, but it's got to be for another person. Then at the end of the day, the scientists called the participants in the study, did another happiness assessment to see if there were any changes in their happiness levels depending on which of the two conditions they had been assigned to. Now, I've heard these scientists talk about their research, and a few of the examples that they've provided in terms of how people spent their money were as following. So one person in the personal spending condition went to CVS and bought herself some makeup. Another individual took his money to the campus bookstore, got some school supplies. A bunch of people in the personal spending condition went to the campus Starbucks and bought a cup of coffee. In the pro-social spending condition, one person took their money and gave it to a homeless person downtown. Another person took their money and bought a toy for his nephew. In this condition, too, a bunch of people bought coffee, but this time it was for the person in line behind them or for a friend or a roommate. You can see that there's this main effect of Starbucks across both of these conditions. Apparently what this means is that if you give college students $5, it just looks like coffee to them and they run over to Starbucks as fast as they can. But from a scientific perspective, this is very interesting because now we have the same exact purchase that's being made across these two conditions. A purchase that costs the same amount of money, that is being made with money that's coming from the same source, from the experimenter. The only difference is the target. Is that purchase being made for the self, or is it being made for someone else? Well, they called the participants that evening, they assessed their happiness once again, and here's what the data look like. So in this graph, we're plotting again the happiness levels. First, we'll look at their happiness levels in the morning. So the blue bar will be for the people in the personal spending condition. The red bar will be for those in the pro-social spending condition. And in the morning, there was no statistically significant difference between the two conditions. And this is what we would expect. If you randomly assign people to different conditions, you're not going to observe any differences on an individual difference measure. Where they did observe a difference was when they called the participants that evening. So pay attention to the red bar. This is for people in the pro-social spending condition. And here we see a significant increase to their overall happiness. Turns out that people who spent money on others became significantly happier. That there's something about giving of ourselves for the benefit of other people that creates a certain connection with the larger community that ultimately has implications for our own psychological health and happiness. Now, the reality is that not everybody has the disposable income to go out and buy things for other people or donate money. Well, we have found similar effects with time. That if we give of ourselves in the form of time, community service turns out to be another way that will connect us to other people and ultimately help our own sense of psychological health and well-being. So regardless of your age or your background or anything else, pro-social behavior is another very important behavior that we can be doing to increase our happiness. And that is our fourth of the 5 habits for happiness. I would also emphasize that there's something special about the social part of pro-social behavior. In fact, many scientists would argue that if we had only one variable that we could use to predict an individual's happiness level, that one variable would be the extent to which their social connections are strong. The strength of our social networks, having friends and family who we turn to when times are good or when they are bad, that by itself does a pretty good job of predicting our overall happiness. And the extent to which we can spend time with those people in such a way that benefits the community, that benefits others in society, well, that's even better if we can get those behaviors toward the domain of pro-social behavior. All right, let's move now to our 5th and final of the habits for happiness. And number 5 is actually rooted in a Latin saying. I don't know if anybody here recognizes this, mens sana in corpore sano. That's exactly right. Good for you. Yeah, a healthy mind and a healthy body. It turns out that there is a very strong link, as I mentioned in the gratitude study, there's a link between our psychological well-being and our physical well-being. Happiness, I would argue, is a full body experience. We have to take care of our bodies in order for us to take care of our minds. And I want to share with you 2 key behaviors that enable us to take care of our bodies in such a way that translates to psychological health and happiness. The first one is through exercise on a regular basis. The reason why psychologists emphasize exercise so much as an intervention for our psychological health is because when we exercise, that is associated with the release of key neurotransmitters into our brain that are essentially the brain's natural feel-good chemicals. So exercise on a regular basis is one of the most important things we can do for our psychological well-being. There's a physician by the name of John Rady who's written this great book called Spark, where he summarizes a lot of the research on the benefits of exercise in various domains. And I want to share with you one of the quotes from his book. He says, in a way, exercise can be thought of as a psychiatrist's dream treatment. It works on anxiety, on panic disorder, and on stress in general, which has a lot to do with depression. And it generates the release of neurotransmitters, norepinephrine, serotonin, and dopamine that are very similar to our most important psychiatric medicines. Having a bout of exercise is like taking a little bit of Prozac and a little bit of Ritalin right where it is supposed to go. So again, this is emphasizing the idea that when we take care of our bodies, we are in a position to take care of our minds. So the question, how much exercise do we need? Here's the recommendation from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. So they say 5 days a week, 30 minutes of moderate intensity aerobic exercise or activity, which is very simply a brisk walk, will get you to that moderate level of aerobic activity. If you're able to bump that up a little bit and perhaps do something that's more vigorous, like going for a jog or a run, you only need half that amount of time. The idea is that you're elevating your heart rate to a high enough level and then maintaining it, that you're releasing those neurotransmitters that ultimately are contributing to your health and happiness. I'll also mention that exercise is particularly important wherever you fall along that emotion continuum that I talked about at the beginning. Whether you're suffering from depression, whether you're already pretty happy, exercise is something that can help everybody, no matter where they are in that emotion continuum. So to summarize this in a meme I saw recently on social media, had a bad day, go to the gym. Had a good day, go to the gym. The idea is that exercise is important for everyone. All right, so that's the first health behavior. The second one that's also very important for our psychological health and well-being is sleep. Now, many people think that sleep is overrated. They think that it's much ado about nothing. You don't actually need sleep for your overall health and well-being. If you feel that way, you are in good company. It was Margaret Thatcher who once said, "Sleep is for wimps." Or Thomas Edison, "Sleep is a criminal waste of time." From the perspective of this inventor, he thought, I'm not going to waste my time sleeping. I could be using that time so much more productively. In fact, as I understand it, the reason why Thomas Edison invented the light bulb was so that after the sun went down, he could keep working, so that he wouldn't actually have to go to sleep. There's one category of people in particular who don't get enough sleep, and that's college students. Let me share with you some data that I collected in a study that I did a few years ago. This was with WashU freshmen, and I was tracking their developmental trajectory as they were making the transition from high school into college. And on the y-axis are the number of hours of sleep they reported getting on average each night. And then on the x-axis are the 15 weeks of the semester. So they come in the first week, and on average, they're getting almost 7 hours of sleep, which isn't perfect, but isn't great either. It's not bad, but pay attention to what happens over the first month and a half. Goes way down, kind of bumps around for a little bit. It hits a spike at week 14. Anybody want to guess what that is? Thanksgiving, yeah, so we just had it, and I am actually doing a replication of the study right now, and the pattern replicated, of course. You'd think that they would go home, there's no class that week, which is why they can catch up on sleep. You think they would catch up on sleep, realize how wonderful it is, and maintain that. Well, they come back for the final week of the semester, and it's right back to where it was before they left. Well, in addition to tracking how much sleep they're getting, I also was looking at other psychological variables that they were experiencing. And I want to share with you the strongest correlates of sleep. Based on the amount of time that they were sleeping each night, here's what else was going on in their lives. The amount of sleep that they get was correlated significantly with how in charge they felt, or the opposite of that is how overwhelmed they felt. And so this is a question that I now ask of my own students and my own advisees. When they show up to my office and they're telling me about how overwhelmed they are, my first question now is, well, how much sleep have you been getting? And reliably, the students who are the most overwhelmed are those who have been pulling all-nighters and not taking care of how much sleep they've been getting. So if we can increase the amount of sleep that we're getting, this has benefits for us, not the least of which is how in charge we feel of our daily tasks. The second one was they reported more positive emotions. They simply felt better about themselves on an emotional level. They were more likely to report happiness and joy, less likely to report anxiety and stress. They reported being more engaged at school. We know that sleep has implications for our ability to perform cognitive tasks, so they're more engaged academically, and they also feel more optimistic about the upcoming week. And all of this is consistent with the larger body of research on sleep. There are a number of scientists who have carried out studies at other institutions and with people all across the lifespan, and you will find a number of outcomes just like these, regardless of the scientist or the population who they're studying. Sleep has benefits for us both emotionally and cognitively. For a long time, people thought that sleep was just this activity where you were passively removing yourself from the hustle and bustle of daily life, and that it was just the act of taking a rest from the busyness of life that is what provided these benefits. But over the last few years, there has been a huge proliferation of research done by neuroscientists who have been looking specifically at what's happening in our brains when we are sleeping. And contrary to Thomas Edison, who says that sleep is a waste of time because I could be doing other work during that time, it turns out that when we're sleeping, our brains are incredibly active, and they are doing all sorts of important work to strengthen key neural circuits that help us to consolidate memories from stuff that we learned the previous day, and also to ensure that our brains are receiving the appropriate amount of activation in areas that help us to regulate our emotions. This is the reason why if we haven't slept well, the next day we have difficulty paying attention, we're a little bit on edge, a little bit moody. It's because the night before we didn't give our brains the appropriate amount of time that they needed to do the work that was necessary to help us be alert and to feel good the next day. So sleep itself is another key behavior that affects us not only physically, but emotionally as well. So how much sleep do we need? 7 to 8 hours a night, per night, every night. And what's important there is that we are achieving stability in that. Some people say, oh, I'll catch up over the weekend. Turns out it would be much better if we're able to get a consistent amount of sleep every night on an ongoing basis. Okay, so those 5 habits for happiness then, just as a summary. The first one, don't be happy, be happier. Acknowledge that happiness itself resides on a continuum. Number 2, adopt a positive mindset. Remember that a lot of stuff that happens in our daily lives is neither inherently positive nor is it negative. Some stuff is, but an awful lot of what happens is not itself positive or negative. But the beliefs that we hold about those things will make them positive or negative. So if we can get ourselves to shift toward a more positive mindset, that has implications for our happiness. Number 3 is to practice gratitude. Study after study is showing that it's a relatively simple behavior. We're talking 5 minutes per week. If we can get ourselves to reflect on positive things, that has reliably shown to cause significant boosts to people's happiness and well-being. Number 4, pro-social behavior. Spending time with people in any capacity is important for our well-being, but especially when that behavior is geared toward helping a community, helping others, that is another important behavior for our psychological health. And the final one, sleep and exercise. Again, taking care of our bodies is incredibly important for taking care of our minds. And sleep and exercise, I would say, are 2 of the key ways that we take care of our bodies. What's key about these 5 behaviors is that we make them habits and that we incorporate them into our regular routines. So happiness is not simply a matter of one time running on a treadmill or one time volunteering in the community, but rather if we incorporate these so that they become just part of our habits, part of what we're doing on a regular basis, that's where over time we will see significant increases in our overall psychological health and well-being. And it's truly what allows us ultimately to become happier. And when we are engaged in those behaviors that are moving us toward that happier end of the continuum, it can feel really good. In fact, it can feel almost as good as a little kid who just learned how to ride a bike.
I feel.
Do you feel alive?
I feel happy of myself.
I feel happy of yourself too. What do you got? Any words of wisdom? What about for all the other kids trying to learn how to ride their bike? Can you say anything to them?
Everybody, I know you can believe in yourself. If you believe in yourself, you will know how to ride a bike. If you don't, you just keep practicing. You will get the hang of it, I know it. If you keep practicing, you will get the hang of it, and then you can get better and better at it after you do it.
Give me some thumbs up.
Thumbs up, everybody!
All right.
For rock and roll!
Okay, so those 5 habits for happiness, if you believe in yourself and you keep practicing, you'll get the hang of it, and then you can get better and better at it. Thumbs up, everybody, for rock and roll. Thank you very much. Okay, and I believe that we have some time for questions. Down here, please. Yeah, so it's a great observation that this man here is making, that there are a number of researchers who are looking at this, trying to pinpoint the exact dollar amount when looking at the relationship between our money and our happiness. I would say that there's a debate. I don't know that there's yet a consensus on the exact dollar amount, but yeah, many people say it's somewhere between the poverty line and around $75,000, where once you reach that point, and I know that that's a significant range, which is why there's a debate, but yeah, once you reach that point, it does seem to plateau. And initially, it's very exciting to have a raise at work, where now you have more money than you're used to. But very quickly, we call this the hedonic treadmill, where very quickly you catch up to it, and suddenly you're going out for nicer dinners and nicer vacations, and that's just the new normal, and you're not getting the same sort of excitement from it as you might have before. So thank you for sharing that. We've got a couple hands in the back. Yeah. Oh, final answer to the shapes question. I've actually never counted. I think the person who had 7, that's probably right. It's all in the way that you interpreted it, but yeah, I don't know what the exact number on the shapes was. Yeah, with the pink scarf. Yeah. Yeah, it's a great question. So the question is, how do we actually measure happiness? Is that a fair way to represent your question? So there are a number of approaches that we can take to measuring happiness. I will tell you that the most common way for us to measure happiness is to simply ask people, on a scale from 1 to 10, how happy are you? Now, many people look at that and they say, wait a second, that's the science of happiness? You ask people how happy they are? There are a couple of reasons why we have confidence that that is an appropriate way to measure happiness scientifically. Because it turns out that that one self-report measure corresponds with objective measures. Now, before I go into those, another thing I'll mention is that we often call happiness subjective well-being. And there's a really important emphasis on the word subjective, that to know how happy somebody is, you can't look at how much money they have in the bank, you can't look at what their degree pedigree is, you can't look at what job they have, you can't look at what city they have, you can't look at what their religion is. None of those things seem to correlate very well with happiness. It has to do with the subjective appraisal people bring to that information. So that's the reason why we have to give a self-report. But that self-report corresponds reliably with other things, such as peer reports. We could ask you how happy you are, but then we could ask your friends how happy they think you are. We could ask your teachers or your parents or your siblings or other people who know you well. And it's not common to find a person who gives himself a rating on one end of the emotion continuum and other people who know them well to give a very different response. The other more compelling reason, I would say, comes from our colleagues in neuroscience who have identified specific regions of the brain that correspond with happiness. In particular, we know that the activation of the left prefrontal cortex relative to activity in the right prefrontal cortex is one hard objective measure of happiness. And the ratio of activation in the brain from the left side to the right side, that corresponds significantly with the self-report measure people give on a 10-point scale of how happy they are. So every time we wanted to do a study like that, we could put people into a brain scanner and get their level of activation to be sure, but that's really expensive and it's cumbersome and it takes time and people wouldn't sign up for the study. So it's much easier and in fact scientifically validated to simply ask people, how happy are you? And people usually have insight to that. In the last row. Excellent question on the role of genetics in our overall happiness. Yeah, so when psychologists are interested in understanding any particular behavior, there's generally three things that we look at. The first is life circumstances. The second is intentional activities or mindset. And the third one is genetics, because genetics, we know, plays a part in our behavior and our emotional well-being, along with other things. And when you look at the contribution of each of those three variables, genetics itself accounts for about 50%, about half of the overall variance in an individual's happiness, or at least when explaining the variance in a large population of how much of their happiness is due to essentially what they get from their parents. And depending how you look at that, that could be good news or bad news. But I want to impress upon you that genes are not destiny. So some people, for example, we know have a genetic predisposition to depression. But just because you've inherited genes that predispose you to something, that does not necessarily predispose you to the effects of those genes, because those genes have to be activated or expressed based on environmental circumstances that can essentially activate them. So that's what a psychologist will often try to do, is take a look at the circumstances that an individual is putting themselves in and the mindset that they're taking to see if they can suppress the activation of genes that might be on that negative end of the continuum. So yes, genes play a role, about 50% of variance in happiness. It's a great question asking about the role of culture in happiness. And are Americans preoccupied with an obsession with just the appearance of being happy? One of the things that we know is a big cultural difference when looking at the United States of America versus other, say, Eastern cultures, is that Western cultures tend to be much more individualistic. So across the board, there's a lot more emphasis on the individual, on material gains, on things that can distinguish me from the person sitting next to me, on ways that I can prove that my life is great, and without as much concern for those around me. Now, there's a lot of variability. Not every American is like that, but on average, Americans tend to be more like that than other Eastern cultures, where more collectively, when you ask someone how they're doing, their answer is going to reflect how the culture is doing or how their family unit is doing. And I would say that a part of that individualism of America is, one of the things that we want to emphasize, that we're better than everybody else, is in our happiness, is in our self-esteem. And with the advent of social media, people are sure doing what they can to emphasize that they're leading the pack in all areas, and they're just in the last couple of years, there's been a lot of research looking just into what social media has done to exacerbate, ironically, loneliness among people who are reporting that they are at the happiest. So yeah, there is certainly a cultural difference that it has its roots in just the individualism that's a hallmark of the United States. I'll go here and then here. Oh, I'm sorry, we'll do this one, we'll do like a triangle. Okay, please. Yeah, yes. Good. I'm glad someone's leaving this talk happy. That's all, or happier at least. Okay. Okay, good.
No, what I wanted to ask about is a lot of times I think that positive psychology gets translated in the mainstream media as a just be positive. Just be positive. And I've seen actually negative effects of that. And I wonder if sometimes that's sort of an outcome we see in the books and articles you highlighted is that people don't address actual problems. They try to focus strictly on the positive. Positive, and it's almost as though recognizing that there's like I have one leg cut in a bear trap, but I still have the other leg. Like it doesn't, is that functional? And so I'm curious if you are aware of research that is integrating, especially for populations that actually have real significant disorders, mood disorders, schizophrenia and such, where strictly having a positive mindset and having gratitude is going to improve only so far. So that you really need those more the negative continuing side of psychology as well as having the positive side. And I haven't seen, I don't get out much, but I haven't seen that integration. I'm just wondering if you're aware of it, if you're studying it yourself.
Yeah, it's a great observation, and I'm glad that you brought that up. So essentially, and let me know if I'm getting the gist of your comment here, the question is, in the mainstream media, is perhaps another misconception of positive psychology that the emphasis is on, oh, just be positive. Oh, if something bad happened to you, just smile about it. It'll go away. In other words, almost like a Pollyanna version of our lives without actually addressing the nature of negative things that are going on that are still affecting us. And I would say, and I should probably add that to my slide at the beginning on the basic premises, but in some ways it goes with the first one, that positive psychology is not about being happy all the time. That there's nothing, when it makes its way to the mainstream media, or what the mainstream media interprets as positive psychology, yeah, it's often construed as, oh, just be happy all the time, and then all your problems will just melt away. And it absolutely is harmful to people, that there are very real problems in our lives, in our societies, that we have to think about how are we going to address them. And positive psychology is in no way saying that all that research on depression and anxiety and mental disorders is stuff that we shouldn't have been doing or stuff that we shouldn't continue to do. Every bit of that research is warranted, and positive psychology is a huge proponent of continuing to give attention to those issues, because we have to, when there is a problem, we have to identify the source of that problem so that we can find an appropriate solution to the problem. What positive psychology is saying, not that we should be doing that instead of this, but in addition to addressing the problem, let's also be maintaining emphasis on the things that are still working. Very often when problems arise in our personal lives or in our relationships or at work, there's a tendency to ask the question, well, what's wrong here? What's the problem? What needs to be fixed? That's a really important question to ask. But what the research in positive psychology would say is, in addition to addressing the problem, let's also make sure that we are maintaining at least some attention on the things that are still working, the things that are still going well. Let's see what we can do to continue to build on those things, because if we aren't giving those positive things attention, it's going to cause those negative things potentially to spiral out of control even more. I mentioned earlier in the presentation that happiness is not the opposite of unhappiness, which is to say that the positive psychology movement is coming really as a supplement to the stuff on the negative side of human behavior. So positive psychology is really saying not how to approach our lives when there's a crisis, but rather once we've made it to that 0 point, how do we move beyond that? And that is a common misconception, is that, if for Hurricane Katrina victims, just be grateful for what you have, and then your house will come back. That's not what we're saying at all. It's about saying, during the common, normal, unbothered days, what are the things we can do to move from 0 to more positive? Thank you for bringing that up. Please. Yeah, so I think you might be talking about Bhutan. Bhutan, yeah, that instead of looking at their in terms of looking at GDP, how much money people have, they're actually concerned with how happy people are. And that goes back to the earlier point on cultural differences in happiness. Admittedly, it's not I've heard of it. It's not something I know a whole lot about, but I think that is something that is worth a culture considering. We know that when we talk about happiness, we're not talking about just temporary hedonism or something that feels good in the moment, but when people are happier, they have stronger communities. They work harder at work. Their ideas become more creative. They're more likely to collaborate with their colleagues, which has the potential to form the building blocks of a strong society. So I think that it'll be interesting to see where they go with it, but I think that it is a worthwhile endeavor. I don't know whether it's something realistically would ever happen in a society as individualistic as ours, but it'll certainly capture the attention of people in positive psychology, at least for a while. Did you have a more specific question than that, or okay? I think we had a question down here. So the question is the role of music and the extent to which that has an effect on our happiness. We know that what we're exposed to in the environment can have a very strong effect on our overall well-being, and music in particular has the potential to activate either positivity or negativity. And most songs are intended to do that, to sort of give you an extra beat to in your step, or to help you come to terms with a terrible breakup or some other terrible thing going on in your life. And there are people who do specifically put attention on that in their research, and yeah, there is evidence to show that the kind of music that you listen to, as well as the kind of TV shows, the kind of movies that you watch, all of those things can affect your overall well-being. And those songs or things that activate negative emotions can have their place, but you also want to be mindful if you have like a really important test or something, it's actually to your benefit to listen to something that's going to put you in a better mood, because that will have benefits for you in terms of your cognition on that test. So the question is the role of the environment when people are growing up. Does it matter if they were in a happier home versus a home where maybe it was a single-parent home that was characterized by a lot of distress? Is that your question? Yeah, we do know that the upbringing that an individual experiences will play a role in their overall happiness. The other thing that might be playing a role there goes back to the earlier question on the role of the genes that you've inherited from your parents. It's possible that in that first situation, that person is not only growing up in a happier home that's happier in that given moment, but maybe those parents who gave birth to that child, they themselves passed on happier genes. So that could be playing a role. But I will also say that when people grow up with adverse life conditions, this is another topic that scientists have been looking at. What is the impact of that? And it turns out that depending on how an individual essentially recovers from that, or the extent to which they engage their social networks or reflect on that experience and think about whether there might be opportunities to grow from those experiences, that can actually leave a person better off. When someone has had to overcome significant adversity in their life, if they've overcome it in a healthy way by engaging their social networks, by developing a sense of mastery internally over that, those are skills that person then takes with them that makes them more resilient in the face of future adversity that they might encounter later on in their lives. So it all depends on what that person does with that adversity. I think that Kelly Clarkson has a song on that, if what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Well, Ms. Clarkson, as long as you're engaging your social networks and reflecting on it and developing a sense of mastery, it sure can make you stronger. Yeah, good question. So the question is, are there sex differences? Do men and women experience emotions differently? It's not necessarily a matter of whether they experience the the emotions differently. Where there is a difference is in the intensity. So both men and women experience positivity and negativity, but on average, women tend to have higher highs and lower lows that last a bit longer on average. So it's a difference in intensity and duration, but not necessarily in whether they're experiencing it. The other thing is that we know that there are differences in terms of how negative emotions become manifest. For women, negative emotions tend to be much more internalizing. Women are much more likely to become withdrawn or depressed when they're experiencing negativity. Men, on average, are more likely to show outward expressions of it through anger or alcoholism or other things like that. But men and women are just as likely to experience positive and negative emotions themselves. Down here? I'm sorry, I missed the first part of your question. Yeah, it's a good question on does our diet affect our happiness? And scientists have been looking at that in particular, and it turns out that the kind of food that we eat also plays a role in that last point on taking care of our bodies. In addition to sleep and exercise, another way that we can take care of our bodies is by eating foods that are rich in vitamins and minerals and whole grains, because that provides fuel to the brain that can also affect our thinking and our ability to regulate our emotions. Yeah, so it's much better to have an apple or whole wheat pasta than it is to always grab the ice cream. Now, granted, the ice cream can be a nice little treat that'll boost our happiness every once in a while, but as long as our diet is rooted in those healthier foods, that will certainly translate to happiness in the end. Go down here and then we'll work our way up. Please.
Some years ago, there was a study that was published in The Economist, different countries with their wealth, and as been mentioned before, once you get to a certain level off, certain countries tend to debug that trend. Denmark was one in particular. I don't know if you're familiar with that, or why the Danes have bigger.
Yeah, so it's another question on the difference in happiness comparing one country to another. And yeah, Denmark does tend to top those lists. As I understand it, another of the differences in other countries has to do with the opportunities for social comparison and how distinct different careers and different jobs are. So in the United States, there's much more of an emphasis that distinguishes people of certain careers and certain salary levels from people who are sort of lower, who have less prestigious positions or lower paying jobs. And as I understand it, in the Scandinavian countries, whether you're a physician or whether you're a garbage collector, hey, if that's what you wanted to do, cool, that's your thing. And there's just less of a distinction that's drawn even sort of implicitly in those other places. So therefore, people are able to really pursue what they're passionate about and less concerned with societal or family expectations about what they should be doing with their lives. So it sounds like the question is, could the differences in happiness levels of countries simply be an artifact of the scale of measurement? That some countries might have a different set of standards for what a 5 is or a 7 is or anything else like that. That could be the case. Admittedly, looking at cross-cultural differences in happiness is not something I've spent a whole lot of time myself examining. And part of the reason why I personally don't spend too much time on that is because if you think about how much variability there is, probably even in this room, of happiness, or even in the city of St. Louis, certainly in the United States of America, there's a huge amount of variability in how happy people are. So to try to compare an entire country to another country somewhere else in the world, I'm just not sure how useful it is. It's interesting, but as you mentioned, part of the challenge is simply how we're measuring it in different cultures and the expectations people might have of happiness. Okay, I know you've had your hand up for quite a while, so I want to get to your question. So the question is, are there age differences in happiness? And it turns out that happiness sort of has its ups and downs. It's affected by whether you've had children. It's affected by whether you've had a career for a certain number of years. But on average, there is some evidence to show that as people get older, especially in the retirement years, there's actually a boost in happiness. And the thinking is that older people, and look, you're smiling now even better, so hopefully this is true for you. So the explanation is that as people get older, they tend to savor things a bit more. When people are sort of at the peak of their career, sort of middle age, they're putting a lot of attention on what's going to happen tomorrow. Am I going to get that raise? Am I going to get that promotion? What are the things I can be doing to advance myself? Because it's very forward focused. One of the things that we know just in general is that when people pay more attention to the present moment, and they train their brains to savor the here and now, that itself is another strategy for increasing happiness, which is why meditation is getting a lot of attention in happiness research, because meditation is all about teaching us how to focus our attention on the sights and the sounds and the sensations we're experiencing in this very moment. Even the sensation of breathing, the sound of our footsteps as we leave the room, versus worrying about what's going to happen tomorrow or ruminating on the past. And as people get older, they come to appreciate that time is a finite resource, and therefore they are more likely to savor what they've got. They've already accomplished whatever they're going to accomplish in their lives, and now is just, I'm going to enjoy the sunset, I'm going to enjoy being in the park today. Great question, good. Yeah, so the question is there a relationship between whether someone practices a religion and how happy they are? So there are scientists who have looked at this, and there is evidence to suggest that there is a small but significant correlation between happiness and whether an individual practices a religion. Now, I want to emphasize that correlation does not imply causation, and there's a huge amount of variability in terms of whether an individual practices a religion or not and whether they are happy or not. When scientists have really dug into this, though, when you look at a lot of religious traditions have built into them many strategies that have been supported by science as ways to boost happiness. So many religions involve getting together on a regular basis with people who you have relationships with, people who share a similar set of interests and values. That by itself is one way to increase happiness. Religions often have built into them opportunities for pro-social behavior, so they will get together as a group, they will go out and volunteer in the community. That's another behavior that is shown to increase happiness. A lot of religions have built into them each week during their services time for gratitude, time for reflecting on things that have happened in their lives that they're grateful for. That's another behavior that by itself boosts our happiness. So I would argue that that relationship is likely explained, at least in part, by the fact that religions have built into them behaviors that we know themselves to be associated with an increase in our psychological health and well-being. We'll go here and then here.
Question about the left frontal cortex. There's apparently a subculture that's experimenting with self-stimulating the brain, applying electrodes with an electric charge. Is there any research on whether this is just, whether there's anything to this, and could someone in theory stimulate their left frontal cortex and feel happy?
So the question is, could we artificially implant electrodes into the brain? Or externally, yeah, I mean, that would be cumbersome. But so the reason I mention that is because we do have a procedure called DBS, deep brain stimulation, which was originally introduced a couple of decades ago for people who suffered from Parkinson's disease. And it turns out that if you implanted those electrodes and stimulated certain regions of the brain, that could put an end, or at least minimize the kind of tremors that they were experiencing with their Parkinson's disease. More recently, over the last couple of years, scientists have been using this for people who suffer from severe, profound depression. And they have, based on their knowledge of the regions of the brain that correspond with happiness, they have been able to target specific parts of the brain for those people. And yeah, they essentially have a pacemaker that's built into their chest through which they are able to regulate the amount of electrical activity reaching the brain to simulate those regions that can bring about more happiness. So yes, it has been done. It is extremely expensive. It's very high risk. It does not yet have FDA approval. It's still considered an experimental procedure for people who suffer from depression. But there are a number of cases that, of people who have done this for whom it has been very effective. Please.
Somewhere I read that about 50% of studies in the field of psychology do not result in duplicate results when rerun. How would you respond to criticism that psychology is not real time, like figure it?
Ooh, that's a good one. Okay, so the question is in response to an article that, by the way, was done by psychologists that sought to replicate some studies that had been published over the last couple of years in the highest tier journals to see if they would replicate. And it turns out that a high number of them did not replicate. This is something, I'm glad that you raised that, because this is something that the scientific community has already known for some time. That just because a study has been done, and even though we might use very careful methods and collect real data and run all of the correct analyses and find statistically significant results and publish them in the most prestigious journals, one study by itself is not enough to truly make an impact on a field. And so this project over the summer that did that went to the most prestigious journals and found that they weren't replicating, was emphasizing that one of the most important parts of the scientific process is doing a study again with a different population to see if it holds. And there are probably thousands of studies that are published in these high-tier journals every year. And a lot of them are, when scientists try them in their own labs, they don't have that same effect again. And so we sort of shrug our shoulders and say, okay, I guess this isn't going to work for us. This was a scientist, I actually know him, Brian Nozick at the University of Virginia, who sort of made a splash about it and let people know about that. So your question is, so does this mean that psychology is not a real science? Does this mean that we shouldn't take this stuff seriously? In order for an idea to gain traction in a scientific community, we have to have evidence. We as scientists have to know that that study was not found just by one scientist with one group of 20 students at their university on one occasion. We have to know, was that replicated by other scientists at other institutions with other samples? So some people heard about this and they said, does that mean that everything I learned in my psychology courses as an undergraduate is complete hogwash? No, because those are studies that have been replicated so many times, we have a high level of confidence that those are things that we can believe to be true because they have been replicated. But most of the studies that are published in psychology, like in other sciences, don't make a splash in the field because they're not replicated. So it's not to say that there's nothing that we may have taught in a psychology class that we now have to modify, but an awful lot of the stuff that we teach, many scientists have found with their own populations. So it's not to say that this undermines the field of psychology, it's to say that this is now bringing to public awareness something that, again, scientists have known all along. Before we believe something, we have to know whether it replicates. And so I think that the main take-home message from this is that it's important for all of us to be educated consumers of science. And just because it appears, just because Men's Fitness or something picks it up, before we get too excited about it, we have to approach it with some cautious skepticism and say, was this just one of those one-off studies, or is this one of the ones that's been replicated for which it can inform a more broad theoretical framework? So thank you for bringing that up. Yeah. And we probably... Do we have time for one more question, and then we'll be all done? Yeah, so the question is, do Middle Eastern practices like Tai Chi, a lot of the Buddhist traditions turn out to have backing with empirical strategies, especially meditation. I would say that is the one that in particular is gaining a lot of evidence. Neuroscientists are also looking at the brains of meditators, showing that has boosts to our psychological well-being, and is another one of those behaviors that will certainly serve us well. Yeah. All right, well, thank you all very much for your attendance this evening.